We usually talk about the integrated writing second when we're preparing for the TOEFL, but it's actually the first writing that you're going to do on the test. That's not a really important detail, but it's something to remember. And so today we're going to talk about the structure of the item, the different sections, and what your job is. And many people will find that this is actually the easier of the two compositions. First of all, let's talk about the sequence. There's basically 4 steps that you need to be careful of doing in that order and making sure that you understand where you are in the sequence so that you don't make any kind of crazy mistakes, right? Okay, first you're going to read. It's going to be 3 minutes, an academic topic. Then you're going to listen. It's a lecture this time, and so it's also academic. It's about the same topic. Then you're going to analyze those 2 items and how they correlate. And then finally, you're going to write. So let's go through these step by step. First of all, the reading section. You're going to have basically 4 points that you need to look for in the reading. You're going to have the intro and then 3 points. And these 3 points, it's important, are opinion points. So you're not reading a text that's objective, it's subjective. So you need to identify what the main topic is and then what are the 3 main points that are being made. So the things to remember when you're reading are that you don't need to read in too much detail. Find the intro, find the 3 points, and that's it. The reason is, when you're doing the writing, the reading is also available to you. So the entire 20 minutes of writing time that you have the text in front of you. That's great, but that also means that nobody really cares if you can tell me a lot of the information that's in the reading, because it's very easy to just repeat what you had on the screen in front of you. So all you need to do for your notes, you're going to take notes on the reading, I know that's a little bit weird, is write down the main idea and then point, point, point. But it's important to remember that you don't need any detail here. You're taking these notes to give you some structure with respect to the lecture. Basically, what you're doing is you're taking the notes here in order to provide yourself a structure literally on the piece of paper that helps you to take notes in the right way from the lecture. Okay, let's talk about the listening. The first thing to know is that this, by far, is the most important step in the whole thing. That's because the listening you only hear one time. And there's a lot of important information in the listening, so it's very important for you to pay attention to the listening. And you need to include as much of the information from the listening as possible in your writing, because the reading, as I said, you have for the entire time that you're writing, so nobody really cares if you can tell me what you saw in the reading because it was in front of you the whole time. What people care about is you can give a lot of detail from the lecture. And so that means you have to have captured a lot of detail from the lecture. So take notes on the lecture. Take very good notes on the lecture. Practice a lot taking notes. And you know, you're using the notes from the reading to create the structure for the notes from the listening. All right. So the things that you need to remember from the listening. First of all the points correspond. So if there's a point made in the reading, you can be absolutely certain that that point will be talked about in the lecture. And in fact, the professor is directly mentioning the text the whole time. The professor says things like, "Did you read that text I gave you for homework? Well, here's what I think about it." And what the professor thinks 90% of the time is that he or she disagrees completely with the text. And so your job is to catch these corresponding points, and then usually there are 2 to 3 details that go with each point, and try to write those details down, because the more of those details you include in your writing, the higher score you will have. Okay, so now in the analysis phase, you have your notes from the reading, you have your notes from the lecture, and what you need to do is identify the different pieces and how they correspond. First of all, we know that the professor nearly always disagrees with the passage. So here's a very simple example. You would never see anything like this on a test, but imagine that the writer says, "Bananas are yellow." The professor says, "I disagree with the text. Bananas are green." Same thing with oranges. The text says, oranges are orange. The speaker says, I don't think so. They're yellow. And finally with apples, the text says, apples are green. And the professor will say, no, they're red. So the first thing you do is you notice that they're talking about the same points, bananas, oranges, apples, and they say different things about them. But you know that they're going to disagree most of the time. In a small minority of cases, the professor will actually agree with the text, but it's very unusual. The other thing that you want to know, or that you want to do, is include twice as much information from the lecture than from the text. This is really important because, again, you have the text in front of you the whole time, and this way you're demonstrating you had really good comprehension and you're including the information that they really want to see. So you find the additional details about bananas that the professor says. They're green because of this. They're green because of that. They'll give you several different pieces of information that support that particular position. And finally, these points will always correspond, as I said, but it's possible that maybe the text talks about bananas, then oranges, then apples, but the professor might talk about oranges, then bananas, then apples. But the points are still the same. It's just the order can change a little bit. That's not the most common thing, but it's possible. Okay, now you need to be really careful with the question because the question is very strange. It changes the order of the text in the lecture, and that's not going to be totally obvious why that's strange for another minute, so don't worry. Here's what the question looks like. Explain the points made in the lecture and why they cast doubt, which means to contradict, on the text. So the question asks you to reverse the order of the text in the lecture. If you see here, it says, talk about the lecture first and then talk about the text, but you first read the text and then listened to the lecture. So this change of, from text to lecture and then switching them is going to be a little bit strange when you do your first composition, and just pay attention to the way that we talk about that kind of strange aspect and make sure that you write your composition in a way that answers the question directly. Okay, so we're going to talk about your body paragraphs first. We'll talk about your introduction in a minute, but your body paragraphs are more related to the notes, and you need to be more careful with them. And there's 3 of them, so you need to do them very well. So they should look something like this. The professor makes the point X. Furthermore, Y is also the case. This information directly contradicts the text claim that Z. Okay, what did I do here? First of all, I followed the order of the question. Remember, the order says talk about the professor, then about the text. The other thing that I did was include 2 times more information from the professor's lecture than from the text. Make your introduction look like this. The professor and the writer discuss fruit. While the professor believes fruit is good for society, the writer takes the opposite view. Both provide support for their positions. Okay. Again, I mentioned both the professor and the writer, and I did them in the order that they asked me to. I mentioned first the professor, and then I mentioned the writer. In addition, I don't give much detail in the introduction. You're going to give detail in the body. The introduction is just demonstrating that you comprehended that these 2 pieces are directly connected and that they have different opinions about the same topic. And finally, this last sentence is a pretty simple link to the next body paragraph. So it's a short, clean paragraph. You want to have very short, clean introductions in this item, which is exactly the opposite of what you do in the independent writing. Okay. So here's what it's going to look like. Here's a sort of a map of what the final text will look like. First paragraph is the introduction, gives you the main opinion of the writer, the main opinion of the professor. And then each point after that tells me what was the supporting detail given by the professor and how did it contradict what the writer said. You're going to give me, as I said before, 2 times more details from the lecture. Always mention the lecture first. and then really focus on contrast language. This is really important. They want you to demonstrate a contrast in the different perspectives, and that's a really important factor. That's the most important kind of language piece that you're focusing on here, is the way that you demonstrate different opinions. And I'll show you some examples. Okay, so these 4 are a starting point. You should read through these and understand the way that I'm showing differing opinions between the professor and the writer in these different examples. You don't want to necessarily use these as your final version, because if everybody in the world uses exactly these sentences, then Johann will start to notice and he'll say, ha! You just memorized that. So it's important to think of these as a starting point. So how can you say the same thing and use your own words? You don't have to make them super different. You don't have to make them really complicated. And in fact, I recommend that you try to keep your sentences simple, particularly in this writing piece. You can get crazy and complicated in the independent, but in the integrated writing, you want to put all of your focus on ideas, and you don't want to worry so much about having crazy grammar or crazy vocabulary or saying things in a really, strange way. You want to be very simple. Here's what the professor said. Here's what the writer said. They don't agree. Keep it simple. Okay. Good luck.